On the evening of October 4th, 1992, a seemingly ordinary flight became the backdrop for one of the most devastating tragedies in aviation history. Flight 1862, a Boeing 747 cargo plane, took off from Amsterdam under questionable circumstances and encountered an unthinkable disaster just moments after departure. What was supposed to be a routine flight turned into a battle for survival that would leave behind a trail of questions, fears, and unhealed scars. But what truly happened that night? Was it simply a series of bad luck and mechanical failure, or was there something far more sinister at play? The story of Flight 1862 is one that exposes the dark side of aviation, where ignored warnings and systemic failures paved the way for catastrophe. The beginning of the disaster. On the evening of October 4th, 1992, a Boeing 747 named Flight 1862 began its perilous journey, a plane that had been in use for too long without proper maintenance. What is striking here is the lack of responsibility from the very start of the flight. The plane had not been properly inspected even though there were clear signs that it could face a severe incident. The reason why this flight was not grounded has become a highly controversial question in the aviation industry. The warning signs before the flight were ignored and the aircraft was allowed to take off. This reflects not only a failure in aircraft maintenance, but also raises a significant question about the responsibility of the regulatory agencies. How could the experts not recognize that such an old and deteriorating aircraft could pose a potential risk? An aircraft that has not been properly maintained cannot continue to operate without facing issues. This not only casts doubt on maintenance quality, but also on the way these agencies operate. The story of Flight 1862 is not just about a specific disaster, but also a costly lesson about negligence in maintenance and monitoring. This flight, which was not thoroughly inspected, is a symbol of what can happen when protocols are not strictly followed. Every detail matters. Every mistake in maintenance and checks can be a sign of a disaster waiting to happen. That's why every little detail is critical. Early warning signs of danger. Before takeoff, Flight 1862 had already received an alarming warning from the authorities. This aircraft was not safe to fly. From minor technical faults to serious maintenance issues, all had been recorded. However, instead of halting for thorough checks, the regulatory bodies ignored everything. It was this lack of responsibility that allowed the plane to take off, carrying a huge risk for everyone on board. The plane took off without full repairs, even though there were clear signs that an accident could happen. A plane that is not properly inspected before a flight is not just a failure in maintenance, but also a sign of poor management. Critical parts were not replaced, and damages were not fixed, leaving behind a ticking time bomb. This raises a question not just about maintenance, but about the leadership of these agencies. Everything could have been stopped if the authorities had taken the technical issues seriously from the beginning. Ignoring these important factors just to push the plane into the sky was a deadly mistake. This not only raises questions about maintenance failures, but also about how these organizations operate. Every mistake in checking and maintaining can lead to a disaster. And that's the hard lesson from this accident. The disaster begins. Just a few minutes after takeoff, an inevitable disaster occurred. A loud bang rang through the cockpit, and immediately two large engines from the Boeing 747 were ripped off the wings. No one in the cockpit could imagine that their aircraft was losing control severely and was about to face a disaster. This was not a coincidence. It could all have been predicted from the clear warning signs beforehand. The sight of engines falling from the plane was terrifying. The aircraft staggered in the air out of control, and this massive machine slowly fell into a state of complete imbalance. Every move by the crew became futile. They had really been too late to realize that the aircraft had lost its most important engines, something no one could have imagined. But why did the regulatory bodies not see this coming? Did they realize the severity of the situation? But as the crew fought to keep the aircraft airborne, a big question arose. Why didn't they realize sooner? Was the failure in maintenance and inspection the main cause of this? Although the crew made every effort to keep the aircraft alive, the truth is they were misled by the system. They had no way of knowing that the plane had lost its crucial engines, something no one could foresee. The life or death struggle. Losing engines in midair is not just a simple technical malfunction, but a life or death struggle. The crew was facing a situation they had never prepared for. While they had experience, this was the first time they were confronted with such a severe incident. This not only raises a question about the crew's ability to respond, but also whether they had enough time to manage the crisis. With every second passing, the aircraft grew more uncontrollable. The crew soon realized that no matter what they did, they could no longer maintain control. Meanwhile, there was no warning system to help them understand the seriousness of the situation. Everything was hazy. The failure to assess the situation made the disaster unavoidable. Both the crew and the passengers were plunged into a fight for survival. Every minute that passed was a bigger challenge for the crew. The plane had lost its balance and the crew could not maintain its stability. They could only try to get back to the airport. This was the moment when the wrong decision occurred, failing to understand the importance of adjusting the landing strategy. Although they had all the tools at hand, the lack of information and confusion in assessing the situation had pushed them into a dead end. The wrong landing decision. Choosing the runway was a disastrous mistake. While runway 27 was closer and longer, it was not the best option in this situation. Attempting to land with a plane that was losing balance in such strong crosswinds was an extremely dangerous decision. Why did the crew choose this runway? Was it because it was closer to the airport? Or was it simply a lack of information and understanding of the severity of the situation? Choosing to land on runway 27, though seemingly reasonable in the moment, turned out to be a terrible decision in practice. This shows the failure to assess all the factors affecting safety. The crew chose quickly instead of carefully and safely. This made everything more difficult. They didn't have time to consider the safety of the passengers and the state of the plane. The decision to choose the wrong runway only added to the danger. Trying to land in strong crosswinds made things even worse. This was not just a mistake in the emergency moment, but also a reflection of the crew's lack of understanding about the situation. They were rushing instead of thinking about all the variables. This is what led the aircraft to an uncontrollable state, pushing it into a vicious cycle. The final challenge. As the aircraft entered a 360-degree loop to lose altitude, another severe challenge appeared: the imbalance between the wings. While the left wing was still functioning, the right wing, having lost its engine, couldn't generate enough lift. This made the aircraft increasingly difficult to control, especially when they needed to reduce speed to prepare for landing. This not only made it harder for the crew, but also significantly increased the risk of disaster. The crew quickly realized that they were losing control of the aircraft. The damage to the plane was too severe to maintain stability. Despite the efforts to regain control, it became clear that the plane was no longer capable of handling itself. The crew no longer had the power to control the situation. This is one of the most terrifying moments of a disaster, when the crew realizes that all their efforts are futile. The aircraft continued to lose altitude and speed, while the crew did everything they could to control the massive plane. However, it had lost too much stability and there was no way to maintain control. The crew was helpless and their efforts could not reverse the situation. The disaster was inevitable. The crew had tried to fight for survival, but the battle was already lost. The race against time. As time ran out, the aircraft became even more dangerous. The crew quickly realized that they could no longer land as planned. Every calculation, every effort was futile. There was no choice but to attempt to approach the runway, although the aircraft had already lost its balance. Time was the crew's greatest enemy in this moment. With every second passing, the aircraft continued to lose control. While the crew tried everything to get back to the airport, they no longer had enough time to complete a safe landing. They were racing against death. The situation became tense with every passing minute as the aircraft lost more stability and prepared for an emergency landing under extreme risk. Both the crew and the passengers realized that every effort had failed. The plane was gradually losing altitude and control with only a few seconds left to land. The exhaustion, the despair, and the knowledge that nothing could be changed anymore made the crew seemingly powerless. This was the moment of life or death, and the aircraft couldn't be saved anymore. The final collapse. Eventually, the Boeing 747 could no longer stay airborne and crashed into two apartment buildings. The massive explosion destroyed everything in seconds, claiming the lives of the crew and passengers and causing massive devastation. The question arises, could this disaster have been avoided if the crew had made a different choice? And could the system have done anything to prevent this accident? The crash was not just about the failure to control the aircraft, but also a wake-up call for the aviation industry regarding safety. Mistakes in management, maintenance, and communication created a disaster that was unavoidable. Every factor, even the smallest one, can be the weak link leading to disaster. And this failure is not just a personal mistake, but a systemic problem. This disaster not only made us question the responsibility of the crew, but also served as a warning about the weaknesses in the management of aviation systems. If this aircraft had not been used for so long without maintenance, perhaps the disaster wouldn't have happened. This is a costly lesson about the importance of following protocols and ensuring safety in the aviation industry. The aftermath and doubts. After the disaster, suspicions and theories about a cover-up began to arise. Some people described seeing individuals in white protective suits at the crash site, and some documents related to military cargo mysteriously disappeared. These doubts couldn't be easily explained. Was it possible that the authorities had concealed the truth? Were there cover-up efforts behind this tragedy? The lack of official information and the mysterious disappearance of crucial documents further fueled these suspicions. Some witnesses claimed to have seen people in white protective suits at the crash site, but no official reports confirmed this. Added to this, critical cargo documents had been deleted or vanished. These were factors that led the public to question the transparency of the investigation. The investigation after the disaster couldn't clarify all the lingering questions. Could the missing documents have been erased to cover up something, or were these just routine management failures? Regardless of the reason, the lack of transparency made this disaster not just a plane crash, but also a costly lesson about how the aviation industry operates. The lesson and the truth behind. In the end, after all the incidents, the official investigation concluded that the disaster was inevitable. An aircraft with poor maintenance and neglected inspections had to pay a steep price. However, many questions remained unanswered. Did the regulatory bodies truly fulfill their responsibility? And were there other factors beyond control that contributed to this disaster? Although the investigation concluded that the plane suffered from serious technical issues, the biggest issue was the failure in management and maintenance. The authorities failed to realize the severity of the danger, and the negligence in maintenance led to the disaster. The people in charge of the aviation industry need to review maintenance procedures, checks, and oversight. This disaster is not just a warning about negligence in maintenance, but also a wake-up call for the regulatory bodies to improve their checks and safety protocols. What happened with Flight 1862 cannot be changed, but the lessons learned from it will help prevent similar disasters in the future. This is when the aviation industry must seriously reconsider how it operates. Flight 1862 was not just a tragic accident, it was a catastrophic failure of every layer of responsibility, from the aircraft's neglected maintenance to the confused communication that sealed its fate. The chaos that unfolded in the skies above Amsterdam could have been prevented, but a combination of poor decision-making, systemic flaws, and a disregard for safety led to a disaster that claimed 43 lives. As the wreckage burned and lives were lost, the world was forced to confront the devastating consequences of negligence. This tragedy serves as an unforgiving reminder that when systems fail, the cost is measured in lives, and no amount of hindsight can undo the damage caused by our own mistakes.